Hi, everyone. My name is Ankit, and I'm the co-founder and CTO at Postman. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you all about our growth story. Uh, right, why am I here? Some of these numbers that I just wanted to bring about. So currently, Postman has 3.5 million users. Yes, it's a product that's based completely out of Bangalore and made out of Bangalore. Now, we also have 3 offices based out of Bangalore, San Francisco, and Austin, across a team size of 25. Postman is also used by 30,000 companies in the world, at least the ones that I know of. 61 of the Fortune 100, 9 of the top 10 cloud companies, 9 of the largest retailers, 6 of the 10 largest manufacturing companies, 3 of the big 4 accounting firms, and 8 of the largest 10 telecom. Now, the question is, how did we get here? Right? So I'm just going to talk about first what our ecosystem is, what our industry is, and then I'm going to talk about our own growth story and our experiences and what we learned from it. Postman is used everywhere. Like, this is a Google Analytics screenshot that I took yesterday. And up until last year, we had this little small portion in Sahara Desert somewhere where we weren't used, but otherwise you can see it's all blue. Every single country in the world has users from Postman. And I think that's great. I think this is for me, this is the biggest success is this part and nothing else. But before I talk about Postman itself, I want to spend some time and talk about APIs for those who don't know what an API is. So for this, I'll illustrate with the example of a Philips Hue. So Philips Hue is a bulb that I use all over our offices, and the objective of Philips Hue is that you can change these lights based on programmatic input. For example, I can say, open up my Philips Hue app and say that, OK, I want this particular room to have this distribution of colors which looks like a sunset. Or I can play a song, and along with the waves that I have for the music, the lights are flickering around the room. And that's great. It's a beautiful product. Right? It works really well. But how does it really work? So a Philips Hue, or any such IoT device that we talk about, it has an API exposed with it. Now, API is a language by which the bulb tells how the bulb should be instructed to perform a particular action. So the language will say that, OK, if you pass me this particular information in this particular structured format, I will change and take the color green. Or I can isolate different aspects of the bulb itself. Right. So obviously, APIs are not restricted to just IoT. They are everywhere. Your mobile apps, your websites, and any such device. I have toothbrushes, actually, that connect via API and tell me, send me a reminder at 10 a.m. that, OK, to brush your teeth. As I said, APIs are everywhere. I want to spend some time in this slide and just talk about the early growth part. So between 2000 and 2010, I think Amazon, and in particular Jeff Bezos, was the biggest trigger for the growth of APIs. 2004, he's like, OK, Amazon is not scaling. Anyway, we're not doing that well in the stock market. Let's just build out a structure for the larger ecosystem where our systems will scale. So they broke down their systems, and every instruction was, if you're running a team, and what they call as the 2 pizza teams, you are building a product where you can, the only way that somebody else can integrate with you is via this thing called as an API. And that drove the adoption for APIs 100%. This initial curve up until 2010 is completely, very heavily driven by companies like Amazon and, of course, leaders like Jeff Bezos. 2010 is a very landmark year because this is a time around which iPhone 3G came out and the App Store came out. And with the smartphone revolution, apps required APIs to be running in the background. And it just made more sense because instead of writing dedicated code that ran inside your mobile apps or your websites, you could now write APIs to which websites, apps could talk to. And of course, as that grew further, now you can see this exponential growth, and as that grew further, more and more apps come out, and more of these IoT devices come out. Like projections, at least around 2022, if I'm not wrong, are around 50 billion IoT devices, which is phenomenal. Right. One number that I probably want to focus on in this particular thing is the one in present, which has 10 million internal APIs. So APIs are something that companies sell. APIs are something that are used to build out apps, but the fact of the matter is, for most companies, 99% of these APIs are internal APIs, that they are private APIs. They are not exposed to external consumers. They are not even shared on your website. But they take care of the entire infrastructure to work in the background. And up until very recently, surprisingly, not many companies were addressing the problem of development of internal APIs, of management of internal APIs. Most of the API companies that came out circa 2009 onwards were primarily focused at your external APIs. At your end user goals of API performance. And I'll come back to that part and why that is important. Right. Postman had its origins back in 2009. This is me and my co-founder. in our days when we were a lot thinner, a lot more hair in some case on their head, a lot less hair in some case on their faces. And we met back in 2009 at Yahoo. This was our first job. And we were working on a front end that would break every day because, again, internal APIs are extremely transient. They change every single day, as many of the developers in this audience would know. So the front end would break every day, and people would come to me and say, hey, you broke it. And I'm like, not really. I didn't even change anything. I was on leave yesterday, right? But the idea was because APIs were changing so often, our front end would break. And there was no system, and it was extremely crude, rudimentary technology to actually manage these APIs. And that's where I think the idea sort of germinated, because as we progressed further in our careers, like I went somewhere else and Abhinav went in another job, we realized that these problems just existed everywhere. So problems outlining being that as software and developers and devices got more and more connected, developers were not getting connected, because developers were using systems like chat, email, source control, which were not necessarily designed keeping the API audience or the API use cases in mind. And again, nobody, until very, very recently. In fact, Postman, I think, has sort of pioneered that particular part, is addressing the problem of internal APIs. And just to outline what an API process looks like, at least in our opinion, is that API process includes these stages. And the reason why I put it out in a circle and not necessarily in a straight line is because API development is very feedback loop oriented. Like, I can't build an API and then forget about it. Like, it has to improve and iterate over time, at least good APIs. And that's why it starts from the process of API design, but goes into development, testing, usage, and so on. And then all of this feeds back into the design process. So first version of Postman. And this is where I would probably want to spend a little bit of time about the history of Postman itself. So 2012 is when me and my co-founder, and then this time we were in Noida, and we were just sitting, and we were still struggling with the same problems with API management, that APIs would change and our front end would break, or the tooling was clunky. And of course, all of us were building APIs at the time. So we just sat down over a weekend and wrote down a very, very simple version. This is not exactly the first version, maybe like second or third. But the idea was, it was super simple. It was just a form. And it was form on top of this Unix tool called as curl, which allowed you a simple UI to make API calls. And that itself, we just wrote it down, we used it internally for ourselves, and then we just published it and open sourced it to the world. Putting it on the timeline, so 2012, first version of the Chrome store, and obviously this was like 0.5, like 0.25 of my time and 0.25 of my co-founder's time, and we just put out the first version. Surprisingly, in between March, when we put it out, and December, we had 50,000 users. And these are people from all over the world, like Nigeria, China, and US, of course, US and India. And this was literally, at this point, was being built by half a developer, which was primarily my co-founder, who was working on his other startup, and then he was just a little disillusioned, so he was working on this on the side. And 50,000 users, I think, was a pretty big number, because out of nowhere, out of like people not even working 100% on this product at a time, and just put it out for the open source community to consume, and it gained traction. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a little detail, but the idea is that it gained traction primarily because of the fact that this was a product that was written for a need that we understood. We wrote it for ourselves, and there were people who had similar problems and similar iterations that they were facing, and that's why this growth number came up. In August of 2013, random point in between, when actually this was the point at which I started contributing a little bit more to the product development, and then we had like 0.725 plus 0.25, like one single developer supporting 100,000 users, which of course we used to get like a ton of feedback. Like at GitHub, every day we would get like 50 requests. These are the features that I want, how, and it was like a very nice, fun community to talk to, because people with like-minded ideas wanting to develop and improve a product that was just out there for the world to consume. This was not a commercial endeavor at all at the time. This was just primarily that we built something that thought would help us. It did. And we put it out for the world to consume because they thought it'll help them, and hopefully it did. Right? October 2014, and the reason why I marked this properly is because at that time is when we launched Postman, the company. We decided, okay, enough of our existing jobs. There is, obviously, like apart from the fact that it's a good product, which a lot of people across the world, 600,000 users at the time, it probably has monetary value. And it does because it is solving an actual problem. The problem of improving developer productivity. The problem of improving communication across developers, building these extremely complex systems through extremely clunky tooling. And at this time, we grew from 2 to 3, and we were 3 founders. And that's one more thing that I want to mention here, and that's important, is that at this point, The story is how we raised money. Like, we actually never thought about raising money at the time, and we got cold called a little bit through investors, which are primarily because of this one thing, which is traction. There is no substitute for traction, whether you're fundraising, whether you're talking about products, like nothing. Like 600,000 users built by 1.5 people, and that itself is a number that spoke for it. And we pretty much like just woke up one day in Bombay. I mean, my founder even had like scruff jeans, and I was not wearing chappals at the time. And we went to a VC meeting, and we raised $1 million. And I think it was great. Nothing to do with us, nothing to do with anything else, except for the fact those 600,000 numbers all over the world. And that is super important. Again, I can't stress traction, user traction enough. And we'll come to how we thought about gaining that traction and how we eventually did it. March 2015 is we launched our first paid product, Postman Cloud, which again sort of stemmed back from our original need for collaboration. That is, for all of us to be aware or cognizant of the current state of the API at the current point in time, which means as different stakeholders, and APIs are not just consumed by developers. APIs are used by end consumers, our customers, our technical writers, and everywhere. In around 2013, actually, we had Box.com, which is one of the biggest storage companies in the world, who published a blog post about how their sales engineers were using Postman. And I think that was great validation for us. And that time, of course, we had grown a little bit in the usage numbers, and we also had hired 2 employees. I think segueing from the last talk here is that the importance of design cannot be understated. And that at that point, what we wanted to focus on is a product that was well-designed and was simple. Because one thing that we've realized and discovered is that developer tools are usually hard. And they don't need to be. They don't need to be complex. It's just because complex is because developers are, in general, like, I mean, of course, like an elite category. They're like smart people. And smart people think that smart tooling is supposed to be complex because the harder it is to consume, the harder it is, the more emotional ability or emotional response I get as a developer from consuming it because it's harder. I think we took a different approach. And we took on certain competitors like SmartBear, for example, who had this tool called Soap UI, which I'm sure a lot of you used at this time. Right? And really, really hard to use. Good product, of course, it has survived like 10 years of usage, but really, really hard to use. So we focused, the first hire we have made was a designer, not a developer. And this is, again, while we were serving 1 million users with like their data on our cloud systems, right? And the idea was to make sure that there is inherent simplicity in our products, that products don't need to be hard to consume to make meaningful things out of. And then finally, just to cover up that part now, is that now we are at 3.5 million users, we have 3 offices, and we have 25 employees spread across 3 cities. And I think that's